To fill people in a little more, you're a super respected agent. I would say, do you specialise, would you think, a little more in directors? I mean, all the directors I know, think a lot of you and everything. Are you a director's guy, do you think? Or
yeah, very much so. It's like, when I wanted to be a director, and I went to NYU Film School, and you start feeling, even then, it's like, I think I know what talent is, and if I can appreciate what a 10 is, at best, everything I was doing was derivative. Little did I realize you could still make a living doing that.
Hey, a very special guest this week. It's Hollywood super agent Robert Newman. Just for a wee change, I thought I'd mix it up a bit. I mean, Robert's an absolute legend in Hollywood circles. He represents Baz Luhrmann, Del Toro, Ken Branagh, Danny Boyle, Alex Garland, Robert Rodriguez, Alfonso Cuarón, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Lynn Ramsey, Emma Seligman, Ramin Barani, Tobias Lindom. All the best directors this guy's got in his books, and I thought his perspective might be quite interesting, so I thought I'd have a wee chat with him. I hope you enjoy it. Oh, and he reads comics too.
Okay, how do I sell you guys on Nemesis, our first ever book from Dark Horse Comics, coming in July?
Imagine a genius playboy billionaire philanthropist, but he's a city's worst nightmare. He's so bad, all the heroes have to get together and stop him. But now he's back and he's looking for revenge. Check out this art from Valerio Giangiordano. He's one of the best guys I've ever worked with. Rogues Gallery has turned out really special. You guys are going to love it.
Well, what do you think?
It's okay.
I'm in the UK, sweating like a pig.
London?
I actually stayed just outside of London. I want my kids to grow up incredibly unpretentious. I didn't actually go into London. We stayed outside.
Okay. So I didn't know it's that hot in London right now. Jeez Louise.
Oh, I mean, when I say hot, remember I'm Scottish, so it's 20 degrees, but 20 degrees feels like the desert to me.
Okay. Well, first time caller, long time fan.
Thanks very much. It's funny, our paths have semi-crossed a couple of times, but it's funny, I only ever hear good things about you, Robert. I've told various pals that I was speaking to you today, and they were like, please pass along my best. And you only, you never hear that about agents. Like, agents are always, there's always strains and so on, but everybody seems to like you, which is nice.
You've got to get out more.
So, I take it, are you on your way to work? Or you...
No, I'm at work.
Oh, you're at work already? My God.
Yeah.
See, that's the difference. Like, writers and directors, they get up at lunchtime.
Exactly. Well, I must say, as I said, a long-time fan, first-time caller. But when you gave me your very gracious invitation to speak, at first I got excited because I thought, wow, maybe we're going to start talking about comic books. And I started making a list of my all-time favorite comic book artists, since I was speaking to one of the great comic book writers of all time. But you lead the way.
Well, do you know what? I'm actually, because there's all these movie things I wanted to ask you, because we have comic book guys, but also started talking to some directors and so on recently. And I thought you never really see interviews with agents, even though a lot of agents are very famous and they're integral in the industry. I thought this could be interesting. But somebody did tell me you're actually a big comic book fan, which I didn't know. So
what, sorry?
Somebody told me you are a huge comic book fan, which I hadn't heard before. What was your period? When did you get into comics?
I was back in the 70s when a big fan. I made a list of some of my favorites of those days. This is all old school. Neil Adams, Bernie Wrightson, Barry Smith, Steranko, obviously Frazetta, the EC guys, Frazetta, and then older than that, Will Eisner and Winsor McKay. But there was a time because when they before Comic-Con became such a thing, back in New York, Star Trek was the bigger thing. So they had Star Trek conventions, but they had a comic book adjunct to it. So I was a Star Trek fan, but really a comic book fan. So we would go, and it was the only place in those days you would meet kindred spirits who wanted to buy, trade, and sell. Yeah. But you'd also get to meet the art. So I don't know if you're a Vaughn Bodie fan, but he did a presentation. I was a big Cheech Wizard fan, and he gave a presentation where he showed the graphics, each color graphic of his work, and then do the voices. And you met him, it was like meeting Jimmy Page or something. He was just a total rock star.
That's amazing. And those early cons fascinate me because there was maybe only 200 or 300 guys getting together, but it was the first time people met like that, wasn't it? It was the first time fandom actually knew there was other people like them. It must have been really exciting to be in. It
was so exciting. It was pre-internet, so to meet other people, in school you'd meet some people who had it, but in New York's probably even bigger than 200 or 300. I bet it was close to 1,000. I bet it was 1,000. It was a pretty big hall, like I don't know, someplace like Grand Central, whatever, some one of the hotels they had over there.
Yeah.
And probably one Donald Trump ended up buying. And and also they would show movies like late at night and any trailers and cartoons. It was the only place you could see all this stuff. So to be in rooms with like hundreds of other, as I said, kindred spirits was fantastic.
And it's exciting, isn't it? To think you're maybe the only guy in your street, who likes this stuff, or one or two kids at school, but to actually find other people who are into your stuff is quite a moment, isn't it?
It really is. And then of course you see it kind of take up what was once a niche became major culture. So to see it take over, I knew who Stan Lee was, et cetera, but to see all of those things eventually become the mainstream that were, I wouldn't say outlaw, but certainly disreputable in the eyes of most, become the dominant cultural force is pretty remarkable.
See, I think there's two types of fan. There's the fan who is excited to see the mainstream embracing something that only they ever loved. And then there's the fan who is a bit like music guys, isn't it? Who are like, well, I was into this long before everybody else, and I don't like to share it with the rest of the world. Which one are you?
Oh yeah, I definitely I like it when things break out. I remember I was talking to somebody once who was asking about my musical tastes. I don't remember what I said, Beastie Boys or Nine Inch Nails, and they said it's like the people you represent, edgy but part of the mainstream. So I always like that aspect of it. I like the idea of being disreputable and taking what was once niche and broadening it out. I don't need this stuff to be ghettoized. I'm thrilled when more people embrace it.
That's the way I look at it too. Like in interviews when I'm asked what my favorite album is, I always say, now that's what I call music for, and that's an album that's known in the UK because it costs $10, but it's got like 100 songs on it, and I love the value of that.
Yeah.
And it's the most uncool thing, but I kind of love the mainstream answer.
Yeah.
But I'll have to send you a book you love if you're interested in like sort of creepy and the Warren comics and everything.
Yes.
I read the best book. It was written by a guy called Bill Shelley. And I read it a couple of months back, and it's the inside story of Warren Publishing. Have you come across this?
I have not come across, but that whole era is fascinating to me because, again, back in those days, there were so few places that had that kind of, when you talk about eerie and creepy. I remember, but the first one of those kinds of things, it wasn't comic books per se, was Famous Monsters of Filmland.
Yeah.
It used to have all the makeups and all that kind of stuff for all the horror movies. And one of my clients, Guillermo del Toro, who's the guy who ran it, Famous Monsters of Filmland?
Forrest Ackerman?
Forrest Ackerman, very good. I think Guillermo wrote him a note when he was like 5 or 6 years old, asking him to adopt him.
Well, listen, I need to send you this book because I was on holiday with the family a few weeks ago, and it was awful. The kids were playing in the pool, and I couldn't stop reading this book. I was like, "Give me 5 more minutes," Like it's you can't put it down. It's like a movie, and the ending is one of the best endings I've read in a non-fiction book. It's the guy's life story,
Oh yeah, speaking of EC and creepy, I still remember one of the early panels. They had Bill Gaines and what was the other one? Al, the guys who ran it and who ran Mad Magazine.
Oh yeah. The famous guy, I'm blanking on him as well, but the guy that was Al Jaffe.
Yeah, they had them speaking because it was right when Tales from the Crypt, the movie, was coming out, so it was a big deal.
So were you interested in being a comic book guy at one time then?
No, I was just a fan. I can't draw a straight line, so right. It was solely as a fan.
But do you not think comics is kind of like a weird, if you can't afford a Super 8 camera, then you can pick up a pencil and draw your own comic. Were you ever like one of those guys? That's certainly who I was growing up.
No, although a friend of mine at the time wanted, because back then the whole thing was fanzines.
Yeah,
like fans started their own stuff, and so he could actually draw pretty well. We lived around the corner from me in Brooklyn, and I remember putting up like $20 to his $20 to help him get his fanzine started. So I guess I was a sort of an agent even at that point, or at least an investor in the arts.
And so who else were you reading? Were you following any writers or characters in particular, or were you an artwork guy?
Yeah, I definitely follow the artists more. Just all the DC, and those are the big debates among the comic book fans: DC versus Marvel. I guess it still goes on to this day. And then going back to the old school, the EC stuff. So that was where that was the stuff I read. And then especially in the 70s, it started to take a darker, more mature turn with like the Green Lantern and Green Arrow, and they get more. I remember, I think there was a plot once about Green Lantern's son or Green Arrow's son getting addicted to heroin. They got much more, as everything did in the 70s, heavier and darker. So it was a fascinating time.
And you would be the perfect age for that, like by the time Neil Adams was doing those Green Arrow stories, you'd be like a teenager coming in, so
exactly.
Probably the age you'd be stopping reading comics. The comics kind of grew up with you.
Yeah, exactly.
So were you a Marvel magazine guy, I'd imagine? If you like EC stuff, you probably enjoyed the Marvel mags and things.
I really remember reading the comic books more, and then reading. I remember one time there was a cover story on Rolling Stone had on Marvel Comics, which was like to actually read about all the people making it. It was just like talking about being going behind the curtain to see the wizard. So it was just fascinating. But then I remember being very hurt because some of them had very dismissive things to say about the fans, the writers. And there was a woman, Marie, I think it was a woman who was one of the few comic book female writers at that time. She was something very dismissive about the fans, which is very hurtful.
Wow. So film school happened for you then soon after, and it's interesting because every agent I know has got a different story of kind of where it happened for them, to fill people in a little more. You're a super respected agent. I would say, do you specialize, would you think, a little more in directors? I mean, all the directors I know, think a lot of you and everything. Are you a director's guy, do you think?
Yeah, very much so. It's like, when I wanted to be a director, and I went to NYU Film School, and you start feeling, even then, it's like, I think I know what talent is, and if I can appreciate what a 10 is, at best, everything I was doing was derivative. Little did I realize you could still make a living doing that. But again, there's a thing Hunter Thompson once wrote about when he was doing Fear and Loathing on the campaign trail.
Yeah.
Because he had ran for, I guess, sheriff of Woody County, wherever the hell he lived in Colorado. And he said there's obviously a big difference between running for the mayor of Woody County or sheriff and running for president. He goes, he said it did give me some appreciation for what it's like to be on the other side. Yeah. And so when I used to show movies and show your little movies at NYU Film School, you're in a room with 50 of your peers. And to this day, I can still tell you, exactly when they laughed, when they didn't laugh. It's so intense and harrowing, and it gave me an appreciation. Again, it's obviously a big difference between making 2-bit Super 16 student films to what the great filmmakers do, but it did give me an appreciation for what it's like to, as it were, stand naked in front of the world to show your work, to have people love it, hate it, to feel them getting when they're not getting it, you can tell immediately when they're shifting in their seats. So I felt that they'd give me an appreciation for what people on your side of the arc do.
And do you think that's unusual? Do you think, are there many agents have your background?
I don't know. I probably don't ask enough about where they are.
Because I've always wondered this about agents too, because I hang around with a lot of directors, I hang around with a lot of writers, producers. Do agents hang out with each other, or is it quite is it too competitive for that, really?
I mean, you certainly know with the agency at WME, it's a very collaborative, collegial group. So I have a lot of great friends here. So, but most people are driven by various. Certainly at WME they are, but driven by some level of passion. If you don't love movies or music or television or novels, then why are you doing it? If you don't have, because it's impossible to be an effective artist representative unless you genuinely love the work of the people you're representing. You're just not going to be that good at it. And so it's like, go back to Comic-Con. You see those people who genuinely love and appreciate great writing, great artwork, and but yet they have no financial stake or professional stake in the business, but they're that enthused. Well, therefore, certainly the people who do have a financial stake in the success of artists and writers, directors, they better have that level of enthusiasm and love for their client's work, or there's something not going to be very good.
It's funny, a lot of my friends are lawyers, but they're in the sort of non-entertainment side of things, and, 1 week it could be baked beans, another week it could be car companies or whatever, and they seem to love the deal more than they love the actual company, obviously, but agents seem like different beasts, don't they? I mean, at your heart of hearts, you really have to be a film fan, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not always an easy business, but it's very straightforward. You find very talented people, tie yourself to them, and jump off buildings with them. and unless you're willing to do that, again, you're simply not going to be very good.
And what do you think, what's the difference between, this is a question I genuinely don't know, what's the difference between an agent and a manager? Like, what roles do they have?
Well, look, at WME, it's certainly, I mean, on legal terms, agents are allowed to negotiate deals, managers aren't, but ultimately, at some point, the lines do get very blurry, and there are many of my clients who have managers, there are many who don't. And so the artist just simply needs to make their own decision on, be the attorney, publicist, agent, manager, who is bringing value to your business, who's able to create more opportunities for you than you would have otherwise, who's able to get better results and financially for you, who's able to help protect your creative process better. That's who's able to spread the word among more effectively, and that's an individual decision. So it's simply not a cookie cutter thing. Each artist needs to make their own determination about who's bringing them value.
Because bringing people in, like when you're acquiring the talent and so on, like you've got a reputation, like I said, directors really love you, but how do you keep their careers going in the direction that's good for them as creatives, because like all of us, we have pet projects that we maybe love that maybe don't have mainstream appeal and so on, like what do you do? Like, how do you guide them as that aspect to your job?
You strategize as best you can in terms of what you believe the chances of success in terms of either getting it made or not, what you think the commercial, artistic prospects will be, what the marketplace will be, but ultimately you trust your talent. There are people who've walked in with ideas like, you know what, I'm not sure I can totally understand it, but I believe in you. I believe in what you're going to do. So let's get to work and put it and make it happen. So that's really, and then you just in the back of your minds, it's like, when I grew up, if you look at the career arcs of a Bob Fosse, a Robert Aldrich, a Steven Spielberg, a Scorsese, a Fellini, a Bergman, whoever it is. And so you start to be able to at least have some feeling for what a career arc looks like, what builds upon it, what you believe culturally will be significant. That is, will it be the number one movie on Netflix? Will it be the number one movie in the box office? Will it win the Palme d'Or? Will it win Best Picture? Whatever you're involved in, you want it to have resonance and an impact.
Because it's funny, isn't it? Like you probably, if you're really good, I guess you can be frank without hurting people's feelings.
Yes, but ultimately, there are people. You trust your artists to be able to envision things that you can't. It's like I've read scripts from an early stage, and I had no idea what the vision that various filmmakers would bring to it. I mean, not a clue. And that's why they're them, and that's why I'm me. So therefore, at a certain point, their genius or their artistry takes over, and they're able to envision something and bring something to realization that simply reading it on the page, especially for an agent or anybody who isn't them, is limited in terms of being able to realize what it is they're going to accomplish.
What about as writers? Is it a different approach to writers, or is it the same thing?
Well, same thing. You look for them to bring them opportunities to A, get their work made, and B, find opportunities for them to collaborate with great people who can, because again, it's a collaborative medium, obviously, if they're just a pure writer, who are the great filmmakers, who are the great performers, the great actors, who are the right producers. You look for those opportunities. What is the great source material? Is it a remake? So it involves a lot of things that ultimately want the same thing. They want to be involved in work that's impactful, that people don't say, "Oh, geez, that came out. I didn't hear about it."
See, that's one of the lovely things about being the guy who generally does the original material. Like the source material, is the non-collaborative nature of it. You just do your own thing and hand it in, and 300 people sort of bring it to life. It sounds much more of a balancing act. The other side of it.
Yeah, again, from your perspective, I'm sure you've seen your work in the hands of people who totally got it and were able to go, wow, that's a great idea. That takes it to another level I hadn't thought of. And then you start to work with people and go, do they actually get what it is we're trying to do here? Or their taste, their judgment, just simply they're not trying to make the same film you do, let alone, and they're fucking it up as opposed to actually bringing value to it.
Is that something you think an agent can help navigate? Like, is that a good function of the agent itself, like putting the right people with the right people, or is that more of a producer job? Do you think?
It's both. I mean, obviously, any good agent is in the field and has a point of view about who are the directors, actors, studios, producers who are going to be simpatico, who are going to be trustworthy, who are going to be who will both fight for them and give them the truth.
Yeah,
and are effective and have taste.
Because I find, like, with my own stuff, like, I've noticed it's almost like an accent thing, like understanding what somebody's saying. Like, just from a very personal point of view, is that British people tend to kind of, in terms of translation, adapting, they tend to get my stuff in, like, New York kind of Jewish guys, that kind of thing. It's a very similar sense of humour, a very similar sensibility to the UK, But the further west you go, it's a little different. It doesn't...
As a Brooklyn Jew, I can understand what you're talking about very well.
But you know what I mean? We've got the common touchstones and everything.
Look, you definitely look for people who have a similar sensibility, who again, as you just said, get the joke, who laugh at what you do, who find fascinating and cool what you do.
And it's funny, I think quite a lot about, like, source material you think is so important and everything, but in certain hands, even the best source material can be disastrous. Like Batman had some rough periods, and then Christopher Nolan comes in and does the best Batman movie ever made, Lord of the Rings could have made a disaster in the wrong hands, but Peter Jackson, it works out brilliantly,
Yeah.
I'm always really interested in that. Like, the pairing is so fascinating, isn't it? Because something makes $1 billion or it's a disaster based on that.
Sorry, so what's the question?
So I was thinking specifically about, like, Marvel's interesting and maybe timing too, because I remember the Marvel stuff was around for 40 years, but never quite resonated with a mainstream audience. And yet suddenly 1999 comes around, you get Blade, you get X-Men, Spider-Man and so on.
Yeah.
What do you think they found? Because they'd such a run, like 20 plus years of it just working,
Look, I think that's a great point. A lot of people had, as you say, they've been around for decades. There had been successful Superman movies, going back to the 70s and Richard Donner and all that. So it's not, you have been able to identify it. Batman, at that time in the public mind, had become, synonymous with a television show, which was obviously camp. But I remember when Steve Norrington, because I represented him, did the deal for Blade. It was, as you said, it was not a big comic book. Wesley Snipes was not at the height of his career at that point, and the studio wasn't even, I remember weeks before the movie came out, they weren't sure of how big the movie was going to be, because it was hard to gauge that audience. And so again, wildly overperformed. And then I remember when X-Men came out, Bryan Singer did a terrific job with Lawrence Shuler as the producer, and clearly they were, and that's a tough one to crack. You need great talent. Look at, a lot of people thought Thor was going to be impossible. Again, I worked with Kenneth Branagh, who did an amazing job in terms of created the characters that have been in, it's got to be a dozen years since the first one. And obviously a ton of credit goes to Kevin Feige. But as you say, into the, 89 Batman was a phenom. So again, it was Tim Burton with that vision. But if you look at 70s, 80s, up in there, when comic book movies have been done well, there was an audience going into, they clearly had always overperformed.
Just reading interviews with the various directors, going all the way back to the 60s, the 50s, the 40s in comic book movies, I always felt it was kind of journeyman directors quite often who got these gigs who didn't really love the material. They were just doing it before they did something else. And Richard Donner and Tim Burton were probably the two exceptions. Yeah. And that they seemed to dig down deep and find a real love for what they were doing. And I wonder if that's what happened with the Marvel stuff. They found Sam Raimi, who loved Steve Ditko's Spider-Man. And Bryan Singer are utterly connected with X-Men. Norrington's a guy I don't know at all, that's really interesting because he never gets the credit, but I think Norrington's Blade changed the world. It suddenly made normal people who didn't normally like superhero movies or Marvel movies suddenly be interested. It was very mainstream suddenly.
No, Steve did a small independent movie, and it was Mike DeLuca. I think Kevin was the producer on it as well, Feige. Yeah. And they took a shot with Steve. I still remember going to visit Steve on the set when he did that rave that turns into the blood coming in down from the ceiling.
The best opening scene. I love it.
Steve had the music cranked on 11. It was so painfully loud, and he is jumping up and down with everybody else. And again, to your point, you need people who love this stuff. Quentin makes a point, actually, in terms of when Jaws came out. It's sort of a similar thing, which was up until Jaws came out, when you had Journey to the Center of the Earth or those kinds of movies, they were done by, I call them journeymen. They were fine and talented, but it was a job to them, and it wasn't their passion. They probably viewed it as slightly slumming or a bit disreputable. Now you had Steven Spielberg come into Jaws, which could have been a studio assignment, with his level of bravura and enthusiasm and obviously genius, and takes it to a whole other level. So I think, to your point, Tim Burton's is clearly on another level, as was Donner. And so you needed these filmmakers who didn't view it as slumming, as kid stuff, as as a B genre, and viewed it as mainstream entertainment and an opportunity to create something bold and exciting. Again, if you look at, Planet of the Apes isn't based on a graphic novel, but in a way, it's not dissimilar in a lot of ways.
It could be.
Again, it was treated as a B movie. I remember seeing it, if you read about it, Dr. Dolittle was supposed to be the big hit for Fox that year, and this weird little B movie comes out and blows the doors down. So there clearly had always been an audience for the kinds of genre that comic books are in, that you were waiting for truly talented people to take to the next level.
Because I think love's quite a contagious thing, isn't it? When you feel the filmmaker or the writer, feeling love for a project, the audience get caught up in it, don't they?
1,000%. You can tell the difference. It's just, as you know, when you're, as a creative person, you're obsessed with every detail. It's not a job. You wake up, you dream about it. You wake up, every nuance, every detail. I was reading a book once about the Wild Bunch, making the Wild Bunch, and Sam Peckinpah was beyond obsessed with that film. And there's a part where Bill Holden says to him, Sam Peckinpah is berating some extra for doing something or not doing something. And Bill Holden says, "Are you going to direct the entire movie this way?" And Sam Peckinpah says, "Uh-huh." And Bill says, "Okay, I better go back and reread the script again." It's like, you can just, when people have that level of attention to detail and invention, that's the difference between a programmer and a movie that people talk about for decades come.
Yeah.
Hey, you lucky devils, just to let you know, we've got 5 new comics out this year from Dark Horse Comics. Nemesis Rogues Gallery is out in July. Prodigy 3 is out in August. Nightclub 2 also out in August. The Magic Order's Big Finale Volume 5 is out in September. And the Jupiter's Legacy finale is finally here in October. Also out from Dark Horse this year, we have the Wanted and Big Game hardcover, a huge library edition, and the Ambassadors with all your favourite artists collected into one big beautiful hardcover in November. Don't miss it.
Funny, I was watching that movie recently. Actually, I love the Wild Bunch, and William Holden is about the same age as Justin Timberlake in that movie. I love the way actors just look.
That's crazy. They always show that they have things like Sean Connery was the difference. When he did The Untouchables, he was the same age as like Tom Cruise was 20 years ago or something. It's crazy.
But I think that men like actors. I think this is the difference between an actor that men like and the mainstream likes is a guy who's clearly a good-looking guy like Sean Connery or whatever, who just lets himself go to hell.
Yeah.
I think men really appreciate that,
When you look like Sean Connery, they clearly do.
Because you see him in The Man Who Would Be King, he's like 42 or something. He's like Britney Spears' age in The Man Who Would Be King. That's
crazy. But he didn't sit there. I don't think there was he didn't use the toupee in that movie, and it made him look more badass.
Somebody told me that when he was filming Never Say Never Again, and he was wearing the toupee, at the end of every take, he would just like take it off and sling it across the room. But yeah, I do wonder about that because I work in genre, I'm always really curious about the types of directors that work well in genre, And I think, I won't name names, but, there's guys who are excellent directors who, whenever they come into genre, it doesn't quite work, even on big movies they spent $200 million on and everything. And I think that's the crucial ingredient that's missing, isn't it? The love of it.
Yeah, I had read it may be apocryphal that one of the reasons Sam Raimi, who was an in-demand director, when he did Spider-Man, he had the Spider-Man poster on his wall.
Yeah.
It's like, because other than that, you're second guessing what the fans want, as opposed to, no, I don't have to second guess anybody. I'm the fan. I'm the audience. I know what I think is going to be exciting and cool and funny. And so, no, I think you're totally right. It's either your genre or it isn't.
And I don't know how familiar you are with later comics. In the 1990s, comics were doing incredible business. I mean, they were selling millions of copies. And then it expanded so much, so quickly, that they started to sort of flood it with people who weren't really established writers. It was people who were assistant editors and people's friends and so on. And the quality really dipped when they stopped using superstars. And I see that happening a little bit just now as well, over the last 5 years or so, that those real auteurs, I think, is what made the noughties comic book movies work really well. The legendary directors, because it's not easy, is it?
No. Directing is a full time. They are the hardest working people on the set, as Guillermo del Toro observes. If the directors should be the first one on the set, the last to leave, and they should only go to their trailer if they need to have to go to the bathroom. So they set the tone for everything else. And unless you have that level of obsession, hard to make a great movie.
But it's a certain personality type, isn't it? I think, like, the directors, even if they don't admit it, I think you must see it all the time, that they have that huge thing in common, isn't it? That level of detail in their personality.
Yeah, I mean, look, the top directors, they are savants in a variety of ways. They're incredibly empathetic to other people in terms of actors, the rest of their crew. They're able to emotionally read where they are. They're intensely creative and visionary in terms of their attention to detail, from costumes to cinematography to sound design, every aspect of a motion picture. And they are futurists. They're able, because again, it takes 2 years really at the minimum almost to make a film. It's like you can't just they have to have a point of view about where the culture is going, where their work fits into what the world will be needing or responding to at that point. So no, it's incredibly, it's a remarkable set of, you have to have a remarkable amount of skill sets to be a great filmmaker.
Do you think it's something that's changed over time? You've been in the business a few years now, and in your lifetime, in your career's lifetime, have you seen different things required of directors, do you think? Is it just telling a story still?
Look, the technical aspects change and the stakes change. But yes, at the end of the day, you're left with a person holding an iPhone, going to a screen, saying, "Entertain me, make me, show me something I haven't seen before, take me to a world I've never been before." And the ability to transport people and entrance them, I don't think that's ultimately what it comes down to. And so I think certain things change, but as Led Zeppelin say, the song remains the same.
Could somebody like Billy Wilder, like 1948, could he step into 2024, and tell the same type of thing? Or could Jim Cameron go back to 1948 and do Double Indemnity? Yeah.
I guess you'd have to ask them if that's the job. I mean, look, I remember we're all certainly lucky to be born in the time we are, where this medium exists, that in the history of human beings, we're at a unique place in terms of having motion pictures. Storytellers didn't have that once upon a time. So, but I think great storytellers are great storytellers ultimately. I think it's an interesting point. And I think ultimately that all these guys would be able to be, if Jim Cameron was back in prehistoric times in a cave, he'd be the one coming up with the designs to make everybody else, to interest everybody else. So yeah, I like to think that they would still have, they would still be the people in their small village who everybody else looked to around the fireplace.
Cameron's would be the longest and sort of biggest cave drum, wouldn't it? It'd gone for miles. It'd be amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's funny because I felt the last 10 years or so, Hollywood has slightly shifted from directors, certainly in the sort of bigger budget level, and it has felt more of a sort of producer's thing or a corporate thing. But I sense a slight change happening now as well. The same as the movie star was slightly shunted, when Spider-Man and Captain America and Batman and everyone came in. Do you feel power coming back to the director a little more? Like, for example, I've heard on superhero movies in particular, a lot of directors will maybe shoot the character stuff, and then the fights are done by somebody else, the VFX teams, previs, all this stuff, and the director's just part of a process. Do you feel it's coming back towards the directors again at the same time as the movie stars?
I do, and I'll give some examples. I mean, first of all, you see it in your business, which is that the audiences get more sophisticated, not less.
Yeah.
Those some people don't care at all and never going to a theater, and some people are beyond obsessed and will come up to you and probably reference scenes or characters you wrote, a dialogue that you wrote that you have a vague memory of doing in the first place. They're that level of obsessed. So let's take a few movies recently: Oppenheimer, Avatar, Elvis, and Nope. Mm-hmm. All 4 films. If you would take an exact same four films, but did not have the names of Jim Cameron, Baz Luhrmann, Jordan Peele, and Christopher Nolan on it, they would have done a third of the business. Mm-hmm. Having those names is the mark of quality. It's something been true for Steven for decades in terms of what the association is. And the core of what our audience is, certainly in the theatrical marketplace, it drives a lot of the other interest. So I think they're the core people, the influencers who organize their family and friends, say, let's go see this, let's not see that. The ones who pay attention months before a movie's release, they are more auteur or director driven than before. So yes, I think what's left of, again, you look at the business in terms of the fact that fewer movie stars are being created. But so yes, I do believe that the top auteurs, in terms of what drives the theatrical experience, in terms of name recognition, are more valuable than ever before.
Because when you pull back from things, everybody always sort of says something definitive, like the movie star is over or whatever, they were all saying 10, 20 years ago. But when you pull back, you see everything's a cycle, don't you? And I really feel there's something emerging with movie stars again as well, isn't there? Something bubbling as people become less interested in the kind of cartoonish characters. They're getting quite excited about real people again, like Anyone But You making $250 million, really based on the chemistry of 2 very likable leads.
Yep.
I don't think that had happened 10 years ago.
I agree with you. I think people discounted. I'll give an example. When Star Trek came out, JJ's in 2009, was it?
Yeah.
At the time, there were no more probably the most imitated television stars of all time were William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy. Everybody could do Shatner and Spock, or Captain Kirk and Spock. And so how can Earth, could 2 other people possibly replace them? Or it would just be a joke, right? Wrong. Yeah. The movie was amazing, and Hemsworth and Zach Quinto Pine and Quinto were tremendous. And so the point is, never bet against youth. People want to say, as you said, about Anyone But You. People from Glenn Powell, Sydney Sweeney, you see it happening with Jacob Elordi, you see it happening with Austin Butler. So the idea that audiences somehow will only want to see old people or people who could be their parents in movies, as opposed to look at charismatic, talented performers who are in the same age range as them. I don't think it's good. Anybody who writes it off, just like saying, there's never going to be any good, the whole music business is over. Well, guess what? People seem to find their own, every generation finds their new stars and embraces. My kids don't listen to the music I do, and stadium concerts are bigger than they ever were before. So yes, I always think there's room for exciting new performers, and audiences will embrace them.
See, I felt the superhero was, coming to an end a few years back when one of my kids had never seen John McTiernan's Die Hard before, my oldest daughter, and I stuck it on, and she was on the edge of her seat. She'd never seen anything like it. And I realised that she'd never actually seen anything with any real stakes before, because when the problem is too big, like when it's something global or universal, then it's kind of too big to get your head around. But John McClane, with no shoes on, having to run across broken glass. She'd never seen anything like that. So I sort of, that was me beginning to sort of think, something's shifting here, and like normal people, regular actors could suddenly be on the up again after special effects.
I mean, look, no genre in the history of this business. Once upon a time, nothing was more dominant as a genre than westerns in movies and in television. They were that was everything, and then all of a sudden they weren't. Once upon a time, musicals were gigantic, and then they weren't. Once upon a time, Bible films based on the Bible were the biggest thing, the biggest spectacle going, and then they weren't. So nothing has to last forever. I don't think just like horror never went away, or science fiction, even when it was just treated like a second class thing at the studios. Their audience was there, but as you say, it's got to be reinvented. When the stakes have to be changed. It has to be. It's always going to exist, in spite of the doom and gloom of comic books. What Matt Reeves' Batman went out and did $750 million worldwide. So I don't think. And then you see, something like Aquaman come out, and a performer as talented and charismatic as Jason Momoa drives that. So I don't think anything, but the formula needs to be changed without question.
What about cinema itself? It's been a weird few years. There's been the strikes, there's been COVID and so on, Do you feel one of those generational shifts coming the way it was with VCRs and prior to that television and so on? Or do you think everything's starting to recalibrate and get back to normal again?
I think the bar always gets raised. Once upon a time, before radio, movies had an audience. I mean, people had home entertainment. Some people stayed home. Television cut into the audience. Each time it happens, each time you have something great and free at home, or semi-free, the bar gets raised. It's always been a challenging business. You can go back. I remember, people complain about dramas and stuff like that. I can cite you, Francis Ford Coppola's movie The Conversation came out in the 70s and didn't attract an audience. At the height of Watergate, it was never easy. It isn't going to be easy, but the audience is still. But everybody has a kitchen, and you can't get a reservation at a good restaurant on the weekends. Everybody has a water faucet, but selling bottled water is $1 trillion business. So yeah. I think people always have room in their lives for great and exciting experiences. And so if we're providing it, we will have an audience. But does the challenges get raised? Yes. Does interrupting the movie habit, as you said, between COVID and strikes, is not helpful? Yes.
But I do think I've got this sense of us starting to come through this now as well. I remember I normally go maybe 50, 60 times a year to the cinema. And last year I only went 8 or 9 times, hardly any at all. Yeah. And it was just nothing was really grabbing me. But I realised nothing was really getting made for the couple of years before. So sometimes we can write something off and panic, without looking at the really practical thing that was going on at the same time.
Yeah, but to your point, yes, you're right. So I'm like you. I have my AMC Century Pass. I go there all the time. Many weekends they don't have one new offering that speaks to me. So it's not good. And it's interesting. You talk about remakes and stuff like that. I made a list for myself of the movies in the 80s that were basically original, that became franchises. Everything from Indiana Jones and Rambo to Porky's or Nightmare on Elm Street. But that was 28 titles I came up with that became genuine franchise, Die Hard, out of the 80s. So that's 3 a year? That for the health of the business, we clearly need more original, exciting ideas to be out there, and a greater flow of product. As we say, not every movie is great, but it certainly helps when you have more than 1 or 2 releases a week.
See, my generation, the Gen X guys, I feel as if part of the problem with that is that we didn't let go of our childhoods. I think we were the first generation of people to not embrace adulthood in the same way that our parents had prior, And I think that we're still hanging on to, I was thinking about this recently, that Star Wars comes out in 1977, and my friends, who are middle-aged men, are still complaining about current Star Wars, in a way that my dad wasn't talking about Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan, which was the same distance from Star Wars. But my dad didn't expect to see Johnny Weissmuller and Maureen O'Sullivan toys in the shop.
It's so true. But no, that's true. Of course, that once upon a time, people used to dress up in a suit and tie to go on an airplane. Now every man dresses like a 14-year-old for his entire life.
I've got a theory. It's because people are scared of death now in a way that previous generations had some kind of spirituality. I wonder if it's is that.
Yeah, what's the expression? When I was a child, I spoke of childish things. When I became a man, I put away childish things. Yes, people seem to be doing that a lot less these days.
It's good. It's good for business. It's great for us.
Exactly.
But I do think that as a writer, I see an amazing opportunity coming up here too. Because as all these things I loved growing up in the 70s and 80s, as these guys age out, it's ridiculous. We've got forcing these guys to dress up the way they did in 1977 or 1985 or whatever, as these guys age out and people are actually getting angry with the material because they feel as if this isn't what they want to be seen in cinemas, do you not think there's going to be this massive wave like we had in the 80s of brand new franchises like nothing you've ever seen before?
I certainly think that could be. I mean, once upon a time, you look into the 60s, all the guys from Burt Lancaster's and John Wayne, they woke up and it was all of a sudden it was Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro or Al Pacino, and they had been, the whole style had been washed away all of a sudden. The filmmakers, it's remarkable. So many directors, one of the things now is so many filmmakers have careers of 30 or 40 years. I mean, Quentin Tarantino, Baz Luhrmann, Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
They're talking about decades, but they have been the defining edge of cool and able to get their stuff made. Whereas you look at who directed movies in the 60s, 10 years later, take the top 10 movies that came out in the 60s, basically. 5 years later, none of those guys got movies made. Just the industry, taste changed, it all washed away. So it can always change.
But even in terms of franchises, I think it's very rare, if you look back at 100 years of cinema, to have a franchise that was popular in one generation still be popular in the next. I mean, you've got Dracula, King Kong, Batman, Sherlock Holmes, have a handful of things, but Lone Ranger, Tarzan, even Superman to some extent, which is a weird thing to say. These things belong to their particular generation.
True. Times move on. Once upon a time, rock and roll was a dominant genre. Now it's new rock music is niche. Go look on Spotify. There's not a guitar band that's in the top 50. Tastes change.
But as an agent, you've got this really sort of global perspective on it all in terms of longevity, and you must see it like directors historically tended to be relatively young, because of maybe the energy involved in making these things, But there's other guys who seem to have gigantic long careers, like composers. They seem to last a long time, don't they? I mean, they're still working in their 70s and 80s.
Yeah, look, you see that across the board, certainly in our industry. As I say, once upon a time, the men and women, and at that time they were mostly men who were running studios were in their 30s. It's like now, if someone comes in and they're under 50, they're considered a pup. So it's the people running the agencies have hung on longer. People have. You look at our politicians certainly for better or for worse, they seem to hang around a long time. What the stakes are, what the rewards are. I guess it all changes individually, but yes, it certainly people have hung on longer, and an infusion of new blood is always a good thing.
Maybe it's the idea that we've stayed kids longer than we were ever meant to, that we need the parents to be in charge. Maybe we like old presidents and we like the heads of the agencies to be older guys,
Yes, I guess there's part of it, or some people don't know when to let go. But here we are.
What was guys like Swifty Lazar and all that? I mean, any picture I've ever seen of that guy, he looks about 100. He feels like he was still working right up to the end, was he?
Yeah, no, it's some people love working as being artist representatives their whole career. Just like you see football coaches, they don't want to give it up. David Brown once observed, work is one of the few things that people can continue to do at a high level or get better at as they get older. You can't drink as much, can't eat as much, can't do a lot of the fun things you used to do as a young person. But presumably you can still do this into your senior years.
See, like an agent and a lawyer and a doctor, I think I kind of like to see some grey hairs. I think you feel kind of reassured, don't you? Because they've got to be the adult.
Well, that's only my selling point these days.
So listen, I know you're super busy. I won't keep you too long. One last, really simple question. What do you think is the most exciting thing? To see something that's going to win a slew of Oscars as an agent, a slew of Oscars, or something is going to make $1 billion. What's the thing that makes your eyes light up?
Hey, Bo, you want whatever you do, you're involved in, to have cultural resonance. That is, if you make a smaller film, you want it to win Palme d'Or, you want it to win Sundance, you want it to win the Spirit Awards. If you make another kind of film, you want it to be the #1 movie on Netflix. You want it to win the box office. You want it to win 10 Academy Awards. And then you look back and work that has resonance that people talk about years later, that's another level of reward. So you want to be involved with things that are culturally important. The touchstones that you and I all mentioned throughout this conversation from the 70s or the 80s, like that's really what the goal is, to create work. Be it, I don't know if Die Hard was probably nominated for any movie, any award technically beyond technical awards, but yet we're talking about the idea that wouldn't have been nominated for screenplay or direction seems ridiculous for now, and yet I guarantee you that endured better than some of the worthy costume dramas that probably dominated the awards then. So that's really what you want to be involved in. Be it Nightmare on Elm Street, be it when they made Texas Chainsaw Massacre, did anybody have a clue that was going to be considered the greatest horror movie of all time, probably put in the Library of Congress? 50 years later, they're making some down and dirty movie that, as Quentin said, is one of the perfect movies ever made. So that's really all you can hope to do is achieve something that has impact in the moment and then has resonance through the decades.
See, I always feel the awards almost don't mean anything to me, because when I look at all the stuff I love that never won awards, the stuff that's considered classics now, whether it's Hitchcock or Spielberg or whatever, because the stuff you really feel is the stuff that is regarded as the junky movies. Like I say, Die Hard, I could tell you 10 scenes from it,
Yeah.
And, the fact Jaws didn't win Best Picture that year is preposterous, isn't it?
No, Sergio Leone, Sam Peckinpah, never nominated for anything. John Woo. I mean, they created visual languages. Robert Aldrich, Don Siegel. So no, you can't. Again, the test of we talked about the test of time is the greatest judge of how your work landed and stays with an audience. And of course, the things like The Godfather. We can talk to Oscar movies that were recognized in their time, and yet. Certainly in genre, it's more the case up until Fury Road. Dr. George Miller had never been nominated. Again, Mad Max, you're talking about one of the most significant movies in motion picture history. Absolutely game changer across the board.
Yeah. It's one last thing I forgot to ask actually as well is it's a very simple question actually. Like I've always wondered this since I was a kid. Like an agent gets you a great deal. The purpose of an agent is to put people together and get a good deal. Like, why do guys who are at that super level, the Jim Camerons of this world, or in actor terms, the Brad Pitts and so on, why does everyone still have an agent? What do you think is the thing that makes it impossible for people not to?
Well, I think each person looks for different results. That is, you can simply look at it as, are they just getting me a job? Are they negotiating a deal? But are there 10,000 other things that you don't see that they're bringing value to? Right. Are they helping? Are they involved in the marketing? Are they involved in publicity? Are there financial structures that need to happen? Are they helping with casting? So there's a lot of things. Have they identified other material? Have they helped broaden me as a producer in terms of television, if they're directors, into commercials? So there's all sorts of things. And to have people in your corner who love what you do, whose opinion you trust, who can go out and fight for you, that ain't nothing.
And that ear to the ground, I guess, is so important too, isn't it? Because you're not aware of every script coming in, every hot new director, if you're an actor. Or but that's the agent's role, isn't it?
To find new things to not define the obvious, not just your look, to not depend on what is incoming, but what are the things that you want to be doing, to have some vision as to what else is out there, what else you can be involved in, what else you should be doing, and having a trusted set of eyes and ears who you can bounce things off of. Again, that's not that's not, as I said before, that ain't nothing.
Yeah. Cool. Listen, the biggest surprise for me is you're a comic fan. Like, I'm loving that. That's great. What was the kind of, in the last 20, 30 years that you've kept up on, or is it mostly a childhood thing for you?
Mostly, yes. I'm afraid I'm a lapsed hardcore comic book fan.
Listen, it can always be rekindled.
Exactly.
Listen, let me send you that book. I'm going to send you the Bell Skelly book. Please. You'll absolutely love it.
Please.
And great talking to you.
My pleasure is to get to meet you at long last. Enjoyed your work at a distance for years, and so thrilled that you had me on.
Thanks very much, Robert. All the best then.
Thank you, Mark.
See you then.